As a person who worked in radio for many, many years, it is a pleasure for me to be able to introduce a person who also worked in radio for many, many years and still does. There are not that many left. Radio is kind of a fickle mate. Sally Hixson is a San Diego native. She grew up with Balboa Park being her playground, basically. She graduated from San Diego State in 1977 and went right into radio news. She took a detour in the 1990s for about 5 years when she was public relations director for the Reuben H. Fleet Space Center. These days, Sally is a news anchor and producer at KPBS. Also, she is today's keynote speaker. Her topic is From Families to Friends. Please welcome Sally Hixson.
And yes, I'm shorter than you all picture me, aren't I? I get that all the time. We thought you were taller. I'm not. I have a big voice. Probably came from my mother as well. I'm really here today, and I'm honored to be the daughter of Virginia Long, who was one of the previous owners, and who is here with me today at age 95. And as Clark said, I did grow up with Balboa Park as my playground. I got to come right on the merry-go-round, go to all the museums, the zoo. They were all free at the time for kids under 16. It was quite fun. The carousel itself, I'm going to give you a little bit of history and a lot about these families that we're honoring today. The carousel's been called the Queen of Amusement Rides. And I think in Balboa Park, that is the truth. I think the carousel is the queen of Balboa Park and possibly the jester, because I think that it brings a lot of fun to friends and families of friends. When all the hoopla started about Balboa Park Centennial, all the attention was focused on the museums, the zoo, and I took it personal that no one was doing anything about the carousel. So I contacted Bill Steen and said, I want to do a feature on the carousel. I talked to my editors at KPBS, and they agreed. So I'll let you watch this right now to give you kind of a capsulized version of our families. From a distance, the Balboa Park Carousel draws in people of all ages, and most of us who grew up in San Diego took a spin at one time or another. But it also has a history that actually predates the 1915 exposition.
The carousel is a 1910 Herschel Spillman menagerie carousel, and it was made in North Tonawanda, New York, and shipped to California.
Bill Steen is the owner of the carousel and said it was initially sent to Los Angeles and then to Tent City in Coronado in 1915. At the same time, Balboa Park was growing into a popular spot, so the original owner decided to place it by the fountain on the eastern edge of the park.
They finally settled down in the park in about 1922, and it was in that location by the fountain. And it remained there until 1968, when it was moved up to this location in the park.
There's another reason why this Balboa Park Carousel is so important, at least to me. I grew up here at the carousel because my grandfather got involved with it in the 20s. My parents had it in the 50s. I grew up here, and you're looking at the ticket box where I sat for many hours selling tickets to put me through college. So that move from the fountain in 1968 stands out in my mind as the city asked my mom to move her carousel to make way for the Reuben H. Fleet Science Center. Now 92, my mom, Virginia Long, owned it for nearly 30 years and was proud of its unique features, especially the fine craftsmanship on each animal.
They're hand carved, and I know the kind of wood, linden wood, from the linden trees in London, in England.
Many of the horses have real horse tails, which raises an interesting story for both my mom and me.
The zoo is very kind, and they kill horses when they're old and feed them meat to the tigers and lions, and they would cut off the pretty tails.
What she didn't tell you is that she hated to see those bloody tails that had just been removed from the horses, so I went with her and took the tails to the tanner, where I watched them clean them for the carousel. I was a kid, and I didn't care. And for kids on the ride itself, an added feature is the ring toss with a surprise for a lucky rider or two.
If you catch the ring, the brass ring, you get a free ride. And I believe we are the only active ring toss game west of the Mississippi.
There is a standard rule, though, that only the employees can move about during the ride. Once, I remember hearing how Robert Preston, who played Professor Harold Hill in the movie The Music Man, rode the carousel and wouldn't stay still.
If I stumbled and I busted my whatchamacallit,
My father gave him several warnings and finally stopped the carousel and kicked Preston off. As a kid, I couldn't believe my father kicked an actor off our merry-go-round. Dad later told me Preston had too much to drink. My father was running the carousel that day from its center, where you'll find all of the equipment that makes it whirl. Bill Brown is the carousel operator now and has been doing so for over 42 years.
This is all original. This is all over 100 years old. This is the brake, which we put on and we're stopping, and this is the clutch we pull on to start the carousel. But we do it exactly the same way that they did over 100 years ago. We have the same timer here. It's a 3-minute timer. It's what they used back then.
Almost everything on the carousel is original, including the band organ and the hand-painted murals above the animals. And as you can well imagine, the maintenance is extensive and is a year-round labor of love.
It's a well-loved merry-go-round. And I'm so glad there's a variety of animals. Tigers and lions and pigs and cats, because I painted the animals. And if they were all horses, I would have been very bored.
It's been 35 years of loving care, carrying on the fine traditions that Virginia and Clarence Wilkin, her dad, set up for the merry-go-round. So little has changed over these, 90 years that the two families have owned or operated the merry-go-round.
So as you head to Balboa Park to celebrate its history, take a spin on the carousel, which truly can take you back in time. Sally Hixson, KPBS News. Thank you. As you heard mentioned there, we mentioned two families. And what KPBS does, all of the reporters do this, when they do a story or when we do a feature, we do it for television, radio, and for the web. So it attracted a lot of attention, and particular attention from an Arlene Simpson, who reached out to me in a very nice email and asked for my address so she could send me a packet telling me about H.D. Simpson. Now, all I knew about H.D. Simpson was that he worked with my grandfather, and I didn't know when my grandfather started or any of the story. But let's let Arlene tell the story.
H.D. Harry, as we called him, was a contractor, building contractor, kind of. But he got a job with with Spreckles, who owned 10th City in Coronado. And so Harry, on a vacation trip through Los Angeles, saw a merry-go-round and thought it would be perfect for 10th City. So he wound up buying it from Oliver Davis, the dealer of Herschel Spillman from New York. And the merry-go-round had been in Luna Park for 3 years, I believe. And this enclosure was built at that time. So Harry wound up buying the whole thing, the merry-go-round, the enclosure, and moved it to 10th City, where it was a fixture, and very happily so. And Harry loved the children and all the pleasure they got, and the tickets were 5 cents at that time. And the merry-go-round got moved from 10th City to the exposition here in Balboa Park in 1915, and then back to 10th City. I can't even imagine moving it like that, but anyway, they did, and eventually it wound up, after 10th City closed, being here in Balboa Park. And I couldn't be more delighted that the Friends have taken it and bought it, and it will stay here in San Diego.
And that's H.D. Simpson and his wife Muriel. Thanks to Arlene sharing this with me. My grandfather called him Old Man Simpson, and it doesn't make sense because he died at age 58. That's not old to me, but Muriel worked in the ticket booth for years, and I learned through Arlene that my grandfather, actually Clarence Wilkin, started working there in 1924. shortly after that was right after he moved his family out here from Kansas City, Kansas, and my mom was 2 years old at the time in 1924, and she had 2 older brothers. That's my grandfather on the left. This is a later picture, and his brother, Frank. Now, Frank had moved the family out here earlier, and he introduced my grandfather to H.D. Simpson and to the Carousel, and my grandfather was there 52 years, so for quite a long time. Bill, you have to catch up. And as you heard me, Arlene mention, and Bill Steen in the KPBS feature, we were all told the Carousel started in Tent City in 1913, moved to Balboa Park for the Southern California Exposition in 1915, back to Tent City and Coronado in 1917, then back to Balboa Park in 1922. At this point, we don't have total proof. We do have proof. There it is in Tent City, and you can see it right on the edge of the water there in Coronado. So we know it was there. And we do know that it was in Balboa Park in 1922, but we don't have the actual proof that it was there for the exposition. We're still looking for that, so if any of you have the proof or the photos, we'd gladly welcome, or David Marshall would gladly welcome them, I'm sure. Either one of us, because we would like to find out. What we do know, thanks to longtime employee Bill Brown, whose sister traveled to North Tonawanda, New York, and went to the Herschel Spillman Museum, there's a binder, and inside that binder is the history of the Balboa Park Carousel. And that's where it was built in 1910. And you can't read it on this screen, but it does mention the moves back and forth, which I think probably would have been difficult without the Coronado Bridge, without the ferry. I'm assuming a barge would take it back and forth, but I'm not quite sure about that. The Herschel Spillman factory itself is now a museum, and you had a person here showing you some hand carving today. They had European master carvers that hand carved all those figures, most of the figures on the carousel. There are 2 little ones that are not hand carved. But I understand they built 3,000 carousels at the Herschel Spillman factory, and of those, only 148 antique hand carved wooden carousels exist today. And of those, 71 were built at the Herschel Spillman factory. We do know, as I said, that the carousel was placed in a permanent location, was what to be a permanent location. In 1922, here's a map that shows the placement of the carousel where the arrow is on the eastern end of the Prado. And if we can go to the second map, you'll see there it is in the right corner again. The interesting thing to me was there's Park Boulevard in front of the carousel, not behind it as it is today. That second map was done in 1940, so we do know the carousel was there in 1935. Now, I don't remember crossing Park Boulevard as a kid, but I grew up coming on the weekends. I was a popular kid in school because any friend of mine could go with me on a Saturday or Sunday, and we had the whole day to run around Balboa Park, as I said, and see the museum, see the zoo, and ride the carousel as much as we wanted. But I don't remember crossing Park Boulevard. And we do have an aerial view, thanks to David Marshall for these photos. You can see the Natural History Museum. You can see the cars. And we also have a slide of the ticket booth, 10 cents at that time, Mom. My mom started at 5 cents also. But it was 10 cents at this time, but see, you can see the cars right there. So that's interesting to me, because at some point they moved Park Boulevard behind where the carousel is. Back to the history a little bit. H.D. Simpson died in 1935, and my grandfather kept working for Muriel. He saved up his coins, and he made an offer for his son, Glenn Wilkin, to purchase it in 1946. So Glenn owned it and ran it along with my grandfather for about 4 years, and then sold it to my parents, Jack and Virginia Long, in 1950. And yes, that was a little bit before I was born. My dad, they then divorced in 1962. My dad took his glassware business, and my mom kept the carousel, and she kept it going until 1977. And you can't call it a carousel. I did do some research, and I found that you can say merry-go-round, carousel, either one. It's just that in the United States, the carousels go clockwise. In Europe, they go counterclockwise. So it's much like the thoroughbred horses in Europe. They go the wrong way as well. Now, my mom has some wonderful memories of the carousel. As I said, she started in 1950.
I liked painting the animals and selling the tickets and knowing that people were enjoying it. and I kept the price down. I started at 5 cents a ride, and I wanted people to be happy that could afford it. And I really enjoyed it, and I loved to paint it, and my dad worked with me to do it.
In addition to her memories and all of our memories, she also has a sense of pride, as do I, and it was a business for our family.
I put my 3 daughters through college, and I kept my price down. The most I ever charged was 35 cents, I believe.
Now, as you saw in the feature, my mother did have to move the carousel in 1968, and that was to make way for the Reuben H. Fleet Science Center, as well as that beautiful fountain. At the time, I was 13, and having my mother have this in the Union Tribune was a bit embarrassing. And then my friends would come to school and bring extra copies. What I preferred was the one of my grandfather, who just kind of looks from afar, and he's looking at the move. That was quite an undertaking, as you can see, so I don't understand how it could go back and forth across the bay, but they might have taken it apart. Now, if you look at the roof line in this photo, that's what the carousel looked like when my mom moved it. We also have another slide that shows the roof line, which she changed. And I didn't realize until I blew it up that my grandfather's standing out front, but there he is. And the pendants, they had pendants, much like Friends has put up the pendants again, so it's lovely to see those return to the roof line of the carousel. After she moved it, around 1968-69, I started working there, and my only job I was allowed to do was run the airplanes and butterflies, which was really boring. But at my age, I wasn't yet 16 and couldn't work around the moving parts. But as soon as I did, I worked in the ticket booth, as my sisters had before me. And I used to work with Bill Brown. Bill and I go back, well, he's been there 45 years now, and we worked together in the 70s.
When I started here, particularly, it was like a family. After work, we'd go to the beach, we'd play Frisbee, we had a ball. So we were like a team, but we were also like our own family at the carousel.
That is a true story. We either played Frisbee out in front of the carousel just to kind of break up the day, or we journeyed down to Scripps Pier with friends where we body surfed and cooked hot dogs in the fire pits down there. And Mom and I had a special way to communicate with our co-workers. That was through, I don't know if many of you know this, but in the ticket booth itself is a buzzer. So if you're in the ticket booth, say you have to go to the bathroom, it's a short buzz. But if you see someone moving on the carousel when they're not supposed to be moving on the carousel, you get my mother's long buzz. And with that came her finger. Or if the boys working there at the time were flirting with girls too much, they would get the finger the other way. I worked at the carousel myself until about 1977. That's when I got my first job in radio. And that's when Bill Steen came on the scene.
Well, many years ago, I met Virginia at a neighborhood ping pong party, and we always had a lot of fun. We'd hear stories about the merry-go-round and what Virginia did and all the people she meets selling tickets. So over a period of time, I felt the pressure from Virginia. You've got to buy this merry-go-round from me. So we made a deal, and we ran it together for several years till I got to figure out what this is all about. But being an engineer, it was fascinating for me to become an owner of a merry-go-round. So it's been 40 years as part of my fabric, and it has just been a joy and a love. So I'm so tickled that the Friends of Balboa Park came along and said they wanted to be the next owner and carry it on for San Diego.
That's right. As a kid, I remember the Steens and the Folsoms very well. Our parents were all friends. They played ping pong and they hung out and had a lot of drinks. And I do remember my mom throwing a baby shower for his firstborn son, Derek. The Steen family has owned the carousel longer than any of the others at 40 years. And I was most happy that my stepson, Tom Buckaloo, also worked at the carousel for Bill Steen for about 5 years, and he also learned how to run it. He learned through Bill how to grease the machinery. His brother Bob Buckaloo worked there as well for a short time, but Tom was there, and he has that sense of pride, I think, that we all have with the carousel. So as you can see, Friends of Balboa Park, the family spirit lives on at the Balboa Park Carousel. From the Simpson family to the Wilkins and Longs and the Steens and Folsoms, the day-to-day workings of the carousel can continue to live on. The engine, by the way, is the original General Electric that powers it around at about 13 miles an hour. Bill Brown is now your conduit to the future, and he's very happy to be staying with the new family.
Now, this will be the third boss that I've had since I've been here. First Virginia, then Bill Steen. For 40 years, we were a team together, and now the Friends of Balboa Park. And hopefully we can keep it going for a lot more years.
And there's more advice to all of you.
Stay with it all the time. Never relax your spirit because there's a challenge. There's a way to repair, fix, and make it better. Over the years, we've added a few things that have helped it become the grand carousel it is.
Oh, enjoy it. Have fun. It's a wonderful thing to do. Children of all ages love riding the merry-go-round.
So from our three families to the friends and the families and friends of the families and friends, take a spin and enjoy the ride.